Were you in Iran during Corona, like during the pandemic? Like all
Yeah.
throughout the pandemic?
Basically the whole thing. Like by the time
Uh,
we left Iran right in the beginning of this year, so it was
mm,
2022, and um, by the time we got here, it was like Tajikistan was completely over it. Like there is no pandemic in Tajikistan
Is there
anymore.
an entry
Like nobody.
requirement for
There
vaccinated?
is. There is. Yeah. You have to have a 24-hour PCR test
but
and
not
or I don't
vaccination.
know, or proof of vaccination, right? And
Hmm.
this was a problem that I had when I was coming back to Tajikistan because I didn't think about this when I so this is the weird thing. Um, in America, they gave us such a hard time about this. It was actually kind of frustrating. When we flew from Mashhad to Dushanbe, we were told that we would have to get COVID tests before we flew, so we did. And then we flew to Tajikistan and nobody checked. Nobody asked to see them. It was just like we could have just not done it and no one would have noticed. And then I planned my trip to the United States to visit my parents. And when I flew, I fly through. I always fly through Istanbul because it's like they're Turkish airline is like they're like the only carrier that can do like Tajik Dushanbe to Los Angeles, and
Hmm.
it's not crazy or anything. Like it's just like you have a 3 hour layover or 4 hour layover in Istanbul, so I always have to do that. And when I left Dushanbe, nothing. Okay, they didn't care. And when I was in Istanbul, before I boarded the plane to the United States, I was in line to go into the terminal. Like the flights to the United States, they close off the terminal and like the gate. They close off the gate and it has like its own special security check just for the United States. And so I was getting in line to do that, and a guy comes up to me and he says, uh, "Do you have a COVID test?" And I said, "Yeah." And I reached for my backpack to get it out. And he said, "No, no, no, don't show me. I believe you." And he went on to
Wow.
ask the next person. Yeah. So,
That's
like,
awesome.
nobody,
Oh, that's awesome.
when I flew to the United States, nobody checked my COVID test. And
Yeah, they
then
don't.
yeah, after I got there, I just enjoyed my vacation. And I had a round trip ticket, so I was ready to fly back to Tajikistan a month later. And I just didn't think about it. No, like Turkish Airlines didn't tell me anything. They didn't say like make sure you meet COVID requirements for Tajikistan. Like no. And when I left Tajikistan, nobody said anything about it. So it was like totally like not in my mind, right? And so I was this was the really infuriating thing was that when I got to LAX to get on my flight to go back to Tajikistan, the lady who was like the check-in lady for the Turkish Airlines, she was she was a jerk basically. Like I'd never seen anything like it. You know, in Iran, you wouldn't believe this, but when we flew from Mashhad to Dushanbe, because we were moving back to Tajikistan, like we were like officially leaving Iran, we had all this luggage, right? We were like 50 kilograms overweight. Like we had tons of
Wow.
luggage, and we were ready. We had prepared ourselves to pay for it. Like when we were packing, I told my wife, I was like, you got to get rid of all this stuff because we can't take this back to Tajikistan with us. And she's like, no, I'll pay for it. I was like, fine. We had to like get our neighbor to help us carry it to the airport, like all of this luggage that we had, and we were getting ready to pay. We did that. It was an Iranian airliner, right? We checked in everything in Mashhad, and we were bracing ourselves for the ordeal of like how much are we going to pay? How are we going to pay for it? And the guy checks in our luggage, and so we were like, so how much is it going to cost? And the guy just like like he looks at the computer and he like smiles, and my wife is nervous and she asks him like even before he tells us, she's like, we're students. Can you give a discount for students or something?" Like she said that to him, and he said, "Yeah, it's free." And we were like, "What?" And we
Yeah,
were we
that's
were I was kind of like, he's joking, right? Like he's making a bad joke, and he's like, "No, no, no." He's like, "No, don't pay for it. Don't pay." And we're like, "Okay, are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm serious." And we traveled without paying the luggage fee. And that's,
yeah, that
that was
happens with
thanks.
Iranian Airlines. I have heard a lot of people saying that
But
they had,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I've had
yeah,
the same COVID thing you're describing in the U.S. when I was going back to Norway last year. Like
yeah,
I the regulations in the Air France or whatever it is, one of the, I think it was Air France, are in that network, and they were saying
yeah.
that like you had to have it 72 hours, and so I was like, great, I have it within 72 hours, and then it went up, and apparently a few days in between me getting the email, whatever, they
Yeah.
adjusted it to 48 hours. And so I was outside of the
Oh,
time. I'm like, how is this fair? You can't email me and tell me the requirements and then not email me an update and within a week, and then I get anyway. So I got to the front. They were like,
Yeah.
nope, you can't go. You can't go. And so I couldn't go. I had to come back, and I had to wait for the next day. And they were like, oh, but you know what? We can route you through France because Paris doesn't have the requirement that, like, oh, it was the
Okay.
KLM that Amsterdam has, and then you don't have to, but you can't do it today because there's no more flights. So I'm like, okay, so this is how serious the pandemic is. That some cities don't have pandemics or what? I mean, it's so insane and obviously not related to
Mm.
public health at all. They were just
yeah,
like, so
absolutely.
I could, then the next day I flew and I didn't need a test at all. That's how ridiculous it was, because Oslo didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a requirement. It was only the connecting city that did. And so
Oh,
not
it's
only did
horrible.
I go through the
Yeah.
whole test, so I don't know. I mean, to the point now, I think the whole narrative is not true. I think there's some baloney behind it, but I yeah, I've just had my
Yeah,
hair pulled out.
I
So did you
don't think
eventually
it's.
get on the plane, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was really tense actually, because it was like 2 hours before the flight, and LAX is horrible, so I needed that time actually, and so the lady was like, I couldn't believe this. I don't know, she's what the issue was, but I check in and she's like, "Where are you heading?" And I was like, "Dushanbe," and she was like, "Tajikistan." I was like, "Yeah." And then she looks at my passport and she's like, "You don't have a visa for Tajikistan." And I was like, it's like, "I don't need a visa for Tajikistan. It's visa free." And she's like, "Well, how long are you staying?"
What's
And
that?
I knew that I knew that
That's-
yeah. So visa free, for Americans, you can stay 30 days. So she's like, "How long are you going to stay?" And I said, "A month." And she said, "You can only stay 30 days without a visa." And I
Oh,
was and I was like,
you know,
"Yeah." And "Look," I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I know. Look, I live there. My wife is Tajik. I know everything." And she's like, "Okay, where's your COVID test?" And I was like, "You
wow.
never said that I needed a COVID test." And she's like, you know, she's like, "It's not our requirement. It's Tajikistan's requirement,
Oh
right?"
my God.
And
Yeah.
I was like, "Who are you, right? Like, are you the
yeah,
representative of like
exactly.
the Tajik government, right?" Like, and so she's saying like, "No, in order to enter Tajikistan, you need a PCR test within the last 24 hours, um, or a proof of vaccination." And I was arguing with her, right? I was like, "Look, I'm getting on a plane. The plane is not going to Dushanbe, it's going to Istanbul." And she's like, "No, no, no. Dushanbe is your final destination. You have to meet Tajikistan's requirements." And she said, "You can show proof of vaccination." And I was like, "I have that." So I pulled out this vaccine booklet when I was vaccinated twice in Iran. So I had Sinopharm 2 times, and I had,
Mhm.
also, Iran gave me an electronic certificate, so I had proof that I was vaccinated in Iran and boosted. And of course, that was a long time. That was already like a year ago. And before I left Tajikistan, and I did this for my parents. My parents are elderly, And my dad is very afraid of COVID-19. So I went to a clinic in Dushanbe and I got an mRNA vaccine. I went and I said, what can you give me? And they said, we have Moderna. And I said, okay, I'll take Moderna. And they said, do you need a certified like international vaccine booklet? And I said, yes, give me that. And so the clinic here, perfectly, really nice, gave me this, um, what is it called? The World Health Organization vaccine booklet, and they stamped it. And they wrote my Moderna booster in it, and I took that with me to the United States in case I would need it. And I whipped out my booklet and I showed it to the Turkish Airlines lady, and she looks at the booklet. And I had just gotten this vaccine like a month before, like literally, like it was brand new, right? And she looks at it and she's like, "This says that you got a booster." And I was like, "Yeah, I had a vaccine." And she's like, "Well, if you're boosted, where's the original, the vaccine?"
Wow, what is this lady, a doctor or something?
Yeah, and I was
Crazy.
like, "What are you talking about? I had a Moderna shot 1 month ago. Does it matter if it's a booster or not? I had the
Wow.
vaccine." And she's like, "No, I need to see the original vaccine." And I was like, "Lady, when I didn't say lady. I'm telling,
It's
I,
okay. I
I'm
understand the
telling,
emotion. I understand the emotion.
yeah, yeah. I'm doing I'm telling the story in a bad way. So basically, I just said to her that, don't you think that when I went to the clinic in Dushanbe, if I hadn't been vaccinated already, they would have given me the first shot in the series, right? They knew that I was vaccinated, and so they gave me the booster. And I consulted with the doctor about this, right? I talked to a doctor and I said, I had Sinopharm. It was 8 months ago. It's kind of like, it's not, I've never had an mRNA vaccine before. So am I getting the booster or am I getting the first shot? And the doctor said, no, 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 you've been vaccinated and boosted. And she said, you're getting the booster. You're not getting your first shot. I said, okay. So I told the Turkish Airlines receptionist, I said that they gave me the booster because I was already vaccinated.
Exactly.
And she said, sir, she's like, what you're saying makes sense, but I need to see your vaccine certificate. And so I looked, at first I thought I didn't have it. I looked on my phone. I had just gotten a new phone, so I didn't have the file saved on my phone. I was like, where is the one from Iran? I had to save it somewhere. And she's like, I'm sorry, but she's like, you can go get tested. Go somewhere and get tested and you can come back. I was like, I can't. I don't have time for that. And this is like, I'm in LAX. Like, where am I going to go? Like across the street to get tested?
So
Like, there's nowhere
ridiculous.
to get tested. So, I called my parents over and I was like, do you guys have? I was like, did I send you my Iranian vaccine certificate? I sent it to them because I was like proud of it. Like I was showing my parents. I was like, look, Iran gave me an official. Look at this. And like you can go to the website and verify that it's legitimate, right? And my mom found it on her. She's like, here, look at my phone, and it's probably in there somewhere. So I found it on my mom's phone. I sent it back to myself. Then I went back and I showed it on my phone. I said, look, here's the electronic vaccine certificate. And she looked at it and she very carefully, you wouldn't believe this, she held up my passport and she verified like my passport number, my birthday, the
Wow.
spelling of my name. She thought it was fake, right? And so she looks at me and she's like, you got vaccinated in Iran? And I was like,
Wow.
yeah, I got vaccinated in Iran. And she looks at the certificate and she's like, how did you get this just now? Like she thought I it was fake. Yeah, and I said sorry. It was on my dad had it. My dad just sent it to me. But I got it
Wow.
when I was in New York. She thought that like I went on the internet and I Googled it and I just got a fake like vaccine
But like,
certificate,
I
right?
don't like. What is the role of these people? Like, I don't understand. Like, why do these like company representatives feel like they're law enforcement officers all of a sudden? Like, I feel that's part of the
I don't
agenda
know.
is to like normalize the kind of like fascist relationship between corporations and governments, and to totally normalize like deputizing these ticket
Well,
clerks to be like law enforcement for the global, like whatever government is. It is really creepy. Like that never happened before. It would be like,
yeah,
what does a desk clerk have anything to do with law, or
yeah,
why would they even
flying,
hold up your nose? You provided
yeah,
the evidence. That's all they need to check off the box. They don't
yeah,
need to
yeah.
judge you morally or ask you like, oh, why do you go to enemy countries? Like that is just so
Right. Well,
ugh.
as you said, that it may be just because that's how the United States is. Like, maybe there is like some like, I mean, this is very strong language, but like maybe there is like some fascist element going on that influences the society in this way. Flying in the United States is a terrible experience. We flew when we were living in Iran. We flew so many times. We had a bunch of domestic flights. It was flying in Iran was always pleasurable. It was like a normal, like, we never had a hassle or anything. Even in Tajikistan, I never, just doing the international flight was never an issue. It was only in the United States, like when I was there, I took a domestic flight to visit my sister who lives in Portland. So I flew. In a week, I flew from Southern California to Portland, and it was a cheap, like, budget domestic flight, and it was so ridiculously regimented, and like the boarding took them like, it took them like 2 hours to board. I was like, what the heck is wrong with? I felt like I was in a, you know, I came from the developing world, right? So I lived in Iran for years, and I lived in Tajikistan. So this is, quote, a third world country, right? I mean Tajikistan's second world, right? But anyway, it was so efficient in Iran, and also and also in Turkey. When I was in Istanbul, you get on when it's time to board the airplane, they open the gate and they're like, okay, everybody on the plane, everybody gets on the plane, and you're boarded in like half an hour. And when I was in the United States, in this airport, I felt like this airport, like this was like a really, like I was in like a slum or something. Like people were like, you know, they were all crammed into the gate, and they looked like they were homeless or something. Like they were sitting there with like their
Exactly.
bags and yeah. And I was like, what is this like dystopian? Like USA feels like it's like I'm in a third world country. And
It
then they
is.
start doing the board. Yeah. And they start doing the boarding, and they're like, if you're like a pre-boarding member, you can now come to the gate. And then they're like, if you're a retired, like if you're a veteran, you can come to the gate. If you're a pregnant mother, like they had like 10 classes of people that had to
Exactly.
board before the other people.
But
Like
the
there, it
number
wasn't,
one
there's no,
class is the rich one. It's the people who can
yeah,
afford to be the
yeah,
rich. It's
yeah.
always the rich one. Yeah.
There's no equality, right? They had, everyone was like, you have to be like in one of 10 categories to board the plane in the right order. Like you can't go ahead of these people. And
Yeah.
it was a nightmare. And so I don't know, like why the Turkish Airlines was so strict. I mean, I guess America is like that, but the experience that I've had flying in, like in Asia, for example, they wouldn't have like, I would have showed them my documents, and they would have been like, okay, and you go, right?
But
But
I'm telling
I
you,
don't know
like it was
what.
the desk agent here for Turkish Airlines. If you were boarding in Istanbul from a hotel in Istanbul, you were coming in and then taking that flight.
Yeah,
They wouldn't have cared at all.
yeah,
It's
it's
something to do
America.
with the
It's really,
Western cultural, the way this COVID agenda has impacted Western cultural business, the culture of Western business, because it's yeah, that's a very
yeah,
interesting story because it
Yeah.
exemplifies that.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the longest I have waited
Uh,
for boarding was in Switzerland, and it was where they gave me a hard time for like PCR tests and vaccination. I mean, at the end of the day, it worked and I didn't have a problem, but I had to insist that I knew about the
right,
policies And Iran does not require, at that time, it did not require a PCR test or a vaccination card. And so I didn't have a PCR test. And they were insisting that, no, you need a PCR test. And I said, I come from Iran. I'm going back to my country. And I know that that's not a requirement. And they said, no, that's what like the system tells us. And I said, no, I don't have it. And I know that's not the rule. So I insisted, and they had to talk to like other people from the airline. And it took them a while. And I was like, I mean, there were a lot of people waiting behind me. So, and it took me like about 1 hour to get to the counter. Like it was a very long line that I was waiting. And so like everyone who was also waiting was probably mad at me seeing that I'm keeping them waiting too. But at the end of the day, like they were speaking French, so I didn't know what they were talking about. But yeah, but at the end of the, like they said, okay, we checked again and you can go. So it's like
imagine that 3 of us have all had like crazy problems with this. Imagine that. That's 100% of us.
Yeah,
like this has had to have destroyed so much industry around the world. It's incredible.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
I hope it's over soon.
I mean, that's the best. Yeah.
But what's your feeling about that? Like, Ben, like the whole like COVID thing. Has your feelings of it changed? Like, because I think initially we're all maybe concerned about it, and then I don't know. Do you feel like you're?
Yeah, I'll just tell you my personal. I don't feel that strongly about the whole. COVID has become very and because I wasn't living in the United States when it happened or anything like that. In Iran, people were quite sensible about COVID, right? So, like Americans were very like, it was this whole like, they're taking away our freedoms and like, and whatever was going on in the United States. But Iranians are they're pretty rational when when Iranians are given, like medical information about COVID or like whatever the professionals say or the establishment says, they kind of accept it basically. And so when the pandemic and it hit Iran first after China, it came to Iran really fast, and Iran was hit particularly hard by it. So people in Iran knew that COVID was a real thing because they, like I experienced, I had gotten very sick from it. So I'm not going around saying like there's no such thing as COVID because I had it. But when COVID came to Iran, people they weren't buying everything in the stores. They weren't stockpile like Americans, like, they bought all the toilet paper and that they didn't need. And it did like in Iran, I swear, I didn't, I was in Mashhad, and Mashhad was hit pretty hard compared to even other parts of Iran. So I never saw panic buying in Iran. Everything in the store seemed like everything was available and it was normal. People were kind of calm. And when they said, you need to wear masks indoors, people wore masks indoors. And when Iran was finally able to provide vaccines, people got vaccinated. Like I met maybe like one person in Iran, and he was kind of a weird guy. Like he was one of those, conspiracy, like he's like, I don't trust my own government, right? And I'll never get vaccinated in Iran. But like I was vaccinated, and like everybody that I knew was vaccinated. But so this was like, I actually didn't really, yeah. I didn't
He wanted to
really
get Pfizer, right? But Pfizer, which is not in Iran, Pfizer, which is like outside.
Yeah.
Like, he would probably go to Armenia or Turkey to get Pfizer or Moderna.
Yeah.
Because
No,
they were very like that. Yeah, that's true.
My university offered, they just gave us what they had. They offered Sinopharm, and I was totally okay with it, right? Like I wasn't, in the beginning, I wasn't even sure, like, do I want an mRNA vaccine or not? Like, I don't know anything about that stuff, but I was kind of thinking that, Sinopharm is okay for me. And so I just took the vaccine that the university gave me. But this is what I noticed, is that people in Iran, they understood, and they kind of like, they went with what's rational, right? It's not like people are just they blindly follow whatever the government tells them. I mean, Iranians are not like this. I mean, how Iranians are. They're quite independently minded, right? But when it makes sense, it made sense that they were telling you like, okay, social distance, wear masks, and people are like, yeah, I'm going to do that for my own safety, right? Or the safety of other people. So they did. They carried out the precautions. They got they got vaccinated, and by the time that I left Iran, um, people were still wearing masks indoors. Like on outdoors, you don't have to, but like indoors, like at the grocery store, on the bus, on the metro, then yeah, people definitely would wear a mask because there's all these people in close proximity to one another. Um, but when I left Iran, so this is where I was at. I had COVID in 2020. In 2021, I got vaccinated and boosted by the end of the year. And also, like a month before I left Iran, I got sick again with something that I felt like it was like a repeat of COVID, right? And it was similar, but it was not so bad. So I got sick another time, and I suspected that it was the Delta variant. It was just this fear that I had. I went and got tested while I was having symptoms. I had a PCR test and it was negative. And so I was like, well, I don't know. Either the PCR test either was a false negative or it really wasn't COVID, but I had something. But after all of that, right? I had COVID in 2020, I got vaccinated, I got boosted, I got sick again in 2022, and I just started feeling like, well, it's COVID is it's over for me. I just don't. I'm not afraid of it anymore. Like I experienced the whole thing. um, I did get vaccinated. So it was like I didn't feel really the need to like social distancing kind of didn't matter to me anymore. And when I got to Tajikistan, and nobody in Tajikistan wears a mask ever, ever. Nobody.
Oh
It's like
wow! I'm
yeah,
looking at buying a ticket into this
yeah,
place.
yeah. When you're here, it's like COVID is like it's just a thing of the past. Like it doesn't exist anymore. And maybe, maybe some people maybe it's still going around, but like I don't notice anything. I guess either everyone's had it already or whatever, something. It's like it's not I guess it's not a big deal anymore. So it
The,
was also for me, it was kind of a culture shock again as well that, I kind
yeah,
of, when I was in Iran, I was already kind of over it myself. But then like in Iran, I was still wearing masks a little bit, like as a precaution. But then when I went to Tajikistan, it was okay, dump the mask and it's whatever. I think I wore a mask like a couple times on the bus because the buses get crowded here. But then eventually, like, I got tired of doing that as well, so I don't ever wear a mask anymore. And then when I visited the United States like a month later, then it was like that was the kind of like the reverse culture shock when I went to the United States. Then it was like everyone was like, "Oh, you have to be careful about COVID, right? Uh, when was your last booster? You're boosted, but you still have to wear a mask, right?" And I was just kind of like, I was like,
do you think the
I
seasonal flu exists in Tajikistan? Because I think it doesn't exist here yet either.
Yeah, you could. I mean, here you could get anything. You kind of in Tajikistan you do get sick more than you would in the United States. Like when I was living here in the past, I got aside from food poisoning, which you're definitely going to get in Tajikistan. One time I even contracted a viral meningitis while I was
Oh,
living here.
Yeah,
And that was not pleasant, but I got better. Okay,
that
so
was definitely more serious than COVID.
yeah, it's
um,
very.
it was
That could kill you.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think COVID was for me. I think it was a little bit worse, but meningitis it was up there. This is like number
yeah,
two. Like
yeah.
I was
Mm.
sick for like 2 weeks and like sweating in bed and I had a headache for 2 weeks with neck pain and it was bad. But
Awful.
but yeah, I when I went to the United States, I also was just me, like kind of like me and my friends, like my friends that were kind of like my age, like from the masjid and stuff. We didn't really wear masks anymore. Like we would maybe we would wear masks in the masjid if the other people were doing it, but then we would just go hang out and do whatever, and we wouldn't like in California. establishments of business like stores and stuff, they had lifted their mask requirements, so you don't have to wear them anymore in California. But still, because my parents were very, you know, because of their health and their elderly, they asked me kindly to be more careful about it, and I complied with my parents' wishes. So we had like at home tests and everything, and I wore a mask for them. But if it was just me, right? If I was alone, I would just not do anything.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
understandable. Like you want to make sure that you don't stress anyone around you out. But it's very interesting that Iran and the US have almost very similar vaccination percentages. Like, I mean, what the impression that you get in the society is a little bit probably different from the statistics. Like I initially I felt like I didn't know anyone who wasn't or didn't want to get vaccinated.
Right.
But then I checked the statistics. The first dose, there were a lot more people who did get the first dose, and then there were fewer people who got the second, and there were like much fewer people who wanted to get the third dose. So it's like it gradually people here in Iran like relaxed, and like they didn't really want to get vaccinated after some point. And that's also the same with masks. Like it was, I mean, I still see people, even though that's not required anywhere. I still see people even wearing two masks
Mm.
in a lot of places. Yeah, and but it's like the other day I was on the subway in Esfahan, and maybe a month ago I was the only one who wasn't wearing a mask, and it wasn't required anymore, or maybe two more people. But now you see a lot more people not wearing the masks, even in crowded places.
Mm.
So yeah, so it's, I don't know, like it's yeah, the impression that you get from people can be very different from what the actual statistics tell you. So I personally was surprised that so few people wanted to get the third dose, even though, like, that you lived here and you saw
Mm.
like there was a lot of, like, they would encourage people to get the third dose too and the second dose, and at some point they wanted to make it mandatory, but it never worked. So
I
yeah.
could have, before I left Iran, maybe a couple months before we left, we could have gotten the third dose. So this was something that, for example, when we got I don't know, when I got my vaccination card, the electronic one that I mentioned, they did say something about it. They're like, oh, you could, if you want, you can come back and get a third dose. And I was like, okay, no problem. But I told my wife, I said, let's go back and get a third dose. And she's like, no, I don't want to get a third dose. I already had two. And I was like, whatever. Like, I also wasn't, so adamant about it. So we
Mhm.
could have had a third dose, but we didn't get one.
Yeah, that's probably how many people felt about the third dose.
Well, it can just go on forever. I mean, they're trying to push like the
Yeah, I
fifth
know.
dose in Israel. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
obviously when you
Yeah.
make money off of whenever you say boo and you can scare people into doing something that makes money, you're going to make it sound worse than it is. That's the whole American style capitalism, is just scaring money out of people's pockets. And people say, oh, it's free, but it's not free. The government pays for it, which is even better for the pharma companies because it means they get paid a whole bunch of money upfront in cash. So like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they are for-profit businesses. That's definitely a factor. But also, I could see COVID being something like the flu, right? Like it kind of mutates every year,
That would
and
be my
so like
argument. It is exactly this.
vaccines don't really, like, I grew up with vaccines, right? So I had a bunch since I was a child, and I even before all of this happened, I used to get the flu shot sometimes. Like I didn't plan to get it every year, but sometimes you're out and they're like, look, we got a free flu shot. And I'm like, okay, whatever, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so I never, when they started vaccinating for COVID-19, I wasn't one of those people who had like this kind of strange aversion to vaccines because it's not something unfamiliar to me. But I was kind of surprised actually. So people that I knew were more against them than I thought they would be, right? Like one time I was talking to one of my friends, and uh and they were like, "Oh, I don't want to get a vaccine." And I was like, "Why not?" I mean, for COVID-19 it's pretty rational, right? Like you can kind of understand like what's the reason for why it would be good to get a vaccine. And they're like, no, 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 I don't ever get vaccines. And I was like, what? I was like, haven't you ever gotten a flu shot or something? And they're like, no, I would never get a flu shot. And I was like, oh my God, like what's what's going on? But Iranian society, okay, is a I kind of appreciate this fact about Iranian culture, and maybe it has something to do with the religious traditions, right? Because there's kind of like this is an element of Islam, or maybe Shiism in particular. It's maybe stronger, which is we kind of as a us I mean Shia Muslims as a religious group, we believe in trusting experts, right? And we believe in science. So like I think in Iran it was a lot easier for people to understand this concept of uh I can accept what a doctor tells me, because the doctor is, they're an expert and they have more knowledge than I do. And that idea kind of made sense to them. But that the United States has a long history of a culture of anti-intellectualism. So Americans, they hate experts and they hate science. So it's kind of like it actually wasn't that surprising that Americans kind of reacted the way that they did. But also in Iran, you could see the difference. Maybe it's a cultural difference.
We also
Yeah,
have a history here of
well,
like
it's
corporate like corruption and regulatory capture. So there's
Oh
maybe
yeah, no
more
need,
meaning to
yeah,
be
no need
skeptical
to
of.
trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
So
yeah,
understand.
the
some of
thing
that's
is,
rooted in irrational skepticism,
yeah.
I would say.
But the thing is, it's like it's very difficult to right now. I mean, I have got a lot of vaccines since my childhood until this age too. But it was like the COVID vaccine was the first experimental vaccine that I got. So that
Yeah, yeah.
I think we've said vaccine and COVID too
also the
many
difference
times for
Too
Bill
many
in
Gates'
its
times.
days. I
Skype.
mean,
Sorry, Satara, you disconnected for a minute there. I couldn't hear anything you said.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
you
Oh
hear
yeah,
me?
yeah. I
Okay.
also wanted to mention that, my uncle he passed away in 2020. It did apparently didn't have anything to do with COVID. He had some other health problems. But my uncle, who had recently passed away, and I was very close to him growing up, he was crippled from polio. And so, because of that also, I'm not like against vaccines as a matter of principle. Um, Although like I said before, when I did get vaccinated, I was pretty comfortable with Sinopharm, because it used kind of a more traditional, what they call a platform. Like the way that the vaccine was made was more like
Hmm.
how they used to be made in the past. It was less
Yeah,
experimental.
it's not an mRNA vaccine. It's an active virus or something. Yeah, that also makes a difference. This was the first vaccine ever that was like experimental that I got, and it was the first vaccine that had different doses in a very, very short time, like in 28 days actually. So that's very different from what we traditionally had for vaccines. And yeah, that's true that Iranians, like, they do not have a resistance against the typical, the common vaccines that we have had. And Iran has a very good history of producing its own vaccines, and we have eradicated different diseases in Iran. But I think it was, for me, it was very, very different with COVID.
Yeah, honestly, it's such a perplexing moral dilemma of, we do want to prevent deaths, right? We want to save people's
Exactly.
lives. And then it kind of becomes this question of how much should the whole society do? Like, how much should we give in order to mitigate, and there's all these, there's these things like there's the law of diminishing returns and everything. So it's kind of like, where do you draw the line? Like, is it worth it to inconvenience like everyone in the whole world, or go to all this terrible like expense and trouble? Is it worth it to save one life? Well, I'm not qualified to make that decision. Like, I can't tell you that, like, one human life is very precious. But there's also a practical side to me that says, like, sometimes I think maybe you just gotta let nature run its course. And this is another point of view. With my family. Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, there's kind of like, my family is a little bit more concerned because of the age of my parents, and also one of my sisters has a compromised immune system, and so it's kind of like they're much more, it's important to get vaccinated and tested and everything. So
I have similar concerns with my parents too, but I would say the more I looked at it, there's like two practical problems. One is the average age of death of COVID patients in the U.S. is a year longer than the average life expectancy. So we're looking at possibly conflating just people dying, and everyone dies of something. And it was before COVID, the influenza was what was taking out a lot of old people because you're weak and it's a regular virus that comes. And now we don't even, influenza isn't even acknowledged as an illness anymore. It's all become COVID. So possibly we've kind of shifted that measurement into COVID. But that's one thing to think about, is like the age of people who are dying. But the other is, I think, really interesting is how we've approached it in Africa. It's like Africans aren't dying of this disease for the most part, especially in tropical Africa, because most people are taking hydroxychloroquine and other medications that reduce viral load, and also because people are exposed to a lot of viruses, they tend to have a more powerful innate immune system that kills things as they come in the body much regularly.
I've read something about that too.
But so we know they're not dying of it, and also life expectancy is so low that people aren't getting to the stage where the elderly, where we'd calculate like we do in the West, because there's a very different life expectancy. But at any rate, all that you can firmly say that it's not a significant cause of death in Africa. Yet there are tons of aid projects to like pump vaccines, especially into Uganda, I know about specifically, and they're like force vaccinating children. They're saying the parents don't have any right to reject it. So in the school, they're coming in and vaccinating the kids without parental consent, because they're using American vaccines, which some donor countries are paying the pharma company for, and they're coming in like $20 a pop, I guess they're paying in donations to these American companies so that they can push this product in the veins of all these people who don't really need it, especially children. Children don't really don't die of this disease at all. So it's a very I mean, the US, the reason they're pushing on kids now is to get it moved from the emergency use authorization into the childhood vaccine mandate. And once it's in that category, they don't have they have legal immunity. They have a legal shield. So they're trying to push it into that, even though logically it doesn't make sense to be vaccinating children. But at any rate, in Africa, if you wanted to save lives, if that's the actual motive, you could put that $20 to use with water sanitation, all these like mosquito nets for children. There would be ways in which you could literally, like within a year, save hundreds of thousands within countries, but millions across the continent of people's lives. They're not doing that at all. They're focusing on one small product that makes a ton of profit. And that's where we're seeing the evils of having a profit-driven system where you can like create this hype around a product and that doesn't look at the actual problems of solving.
Plus why spend money on mosquito nets and stuff like that when you can experiment on Africans, right?
Exactly. It's a tradition of that. We have a long tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, so, and that's this the thing is that it's just because it's all COVID-19 is new, so because this is what makes it really terrible for us to deal with, because a lot of it is just unknown.
Exactly.
And
they take advantage of that.
regardless of what we do or what we don't do, life is going to go on, right? It's not the COVID's not going to be the end of the world. I mean, we have
Yeah.
some world-ending problems right now, right? We
Mhm.
genuinely do. So, but yeah, I think in a couple of years, things just in terms of COVID, because what is needed is hindsight. We have to look back on it, and then we'll see like,
Mhm.
oh, that's how it is, right? But right now, it's a lot of stuff that we don't know.
Well, that's probably a
Yeah,
good
that's true.
place to leave it. Is there any? Do you have any social media that you would like people to follow you on?
My Instagram is still like it's the public thing that I have. My Instagram is it's Benulo86, I think, Benulo 86, and you can look at some of the nice old pictures that I took of Tajikistan. I like to make these like artsy, like, still life photos and stuff like that. So you can check out like some photos of my time in Iran and also Tajikistan, for the most part. But if you try to message me, it's likely that I won't get I won't get any message. You just got to know that if you're always messaging people on Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, doesn't matter, or Telegram for that matter, your messages they're not encrypted. So they're out there. The company that's delivering those messages, they can read them, of course. So you should know that. But as long as you know that, you can use them if you like.
Yeah. Well, that's true with all of the even the companies like Proton Mail that supposedly have encrypted mail. It's come
Oh
out.
yeah,
It's come out that people are
yeah. Yeah,
lying about that. So
they were
yeah, I think
forced, I think, to divulge information.
I think more importantly with social media, just the ones that aren't abusive emotionally or psychologically abusive to you as a customer, because I think most of them now are like all the scrolling apps are trying to hack your brain and do things that you don't want them to do with you. So I think it's good to try and keep that to a minimum. But yeah, hopefully in the future, because of the visa-free travel, maybe we can have a podcast
Okay.
together in Dushanbe. It sounds like that's what we should do. We should all
Yeah,
go
if
have
you're,
especially in the
if you're,
fall once COVID cracks out again here.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you have the abilities, if you can make it out here, because it's hard, it's expensive, and it's a long trip to make it to Tajikistan. But if you ever are in the neighborhood, you can let me know. We can hang out in Dushanbe. I'm always happy to meet people who can who can come to Tajikistan.
Okay, so we
Well,
had
we've kept you for a very long time, so thanks for your time.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
Appreciate it. It's
okay.
been great.
yes.
It's really
I'm
been
always happy
fascinating.
to, I'm happy to share and talk about my experience. I mean, I love to share about, Tajikistan and Iran too, because, this is very, um, it's interesting for people to know about, like, what is it like for an American to live in a place like this,
Mhm.
or, just this part of the world, basically. So, I'm always happy to, and if other people are interested in the same thing, like, like you, for example, if you'd ever like to visit Tajikistan, so I would be happy to,
Mhm.
give you advice or anything. So you
Thank
did
you.
mention social media. I have an email address which is like public, facing, that if anyone ever wants to give like feedback or has a question or something, I have this email address, benk@tilde.team, which is if anyone sends me an email, I definitely will read it. Right. I'll
Okay.
I'll try to respond if I can. Yeah. It was
It was good
Okay,
talking to
great
you.
conversation.
you
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank
too.
you. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you
much.
very much.
Yeah,
سلام
thank
خیلی
you.
برسونی.
Chash.